Hi everybody, I'm Susan Mulvihill. Welcome back to my vegetable garden. Here it is into the middle of September. How did that happen? And I wanted to give you a little bit of a tour of the vegetable garden. Also, I wanted to point out that I try to start all of my videos right here, and the goal has been to show what the garden looks like as the season has progressed. Now this time it probably doesn't look so great, and that's to be expected this time of year for a garden. For those of you who are new to my videos, I live in Spokane, Washington, which is about 300 miles east of Seattle. It is very dry here. We get a very cold winter, and we are in between zones 5B and 6. So let's get started. I'm going to show you how things are growing, what things have changed, and hopefully you'll find it all interesting. One thing I've had fun showing you each time is the sunflowers, because they are going absolutely nuts. And I think that's because the National Garden Bureau declared 2021 the year of the sunflower. They obviously know that they're very special this year. But look at the head on that sunflower on the left there. And then we've got a few more here. And then I have to raise the camera a little bit so you can see these guys. Holy cow. And then more on the right. And there are other ones in the garden, but I just had to show you because I have been having so much fun watching them grow. Now in this row behind me under the floating row cover, I've got Swiss chard and beets growing in there. And that cover is to keep leaf miners away from the leaves. So they're growing just great, but what I really wanted to focus on was these Bulgarian giant leeks. This is the second year I've grown them. I am extremely impressed and happy with them. They are doing great. And I'm just going to let them get frosted. That's not going to harm them in the least. And then I'll go ahead and dig them up, and I'll have to show you that when that takes place. But yeah, look at these guys. Just amazing. If you're wondering what in the world is going on here, I'll show you on the inside in just a moment. This is where I had planted some seeds for different types of crops that I was hoping would ripen by the end of the season. Some will, some won't. But the reason I've got this floating row cover around the perimeter of the bed is to keep the quail away. They are such beautiful birds. We love watching them, but they can be so damaging to young seedlings. So that's what it's there. It's just to make it so they don't even know things are growing behind it. So here's what's growing behind the row cover. I've got turnips growing on the right. I have some new seeds coming up for purple radishes. I've got some lettuce in here and beets growing on the left. I'll show you the pole beans in a moment, but you probably recall that I was having a terrible time with them because of our heat this summer. So I decided that I would go ahead and plant some bush beans in the hopes of getting a late crop from them. Well, many of them are just starting to bloom, so I have no idea if they're going to make it or not. It's pretty iffy. The weird thing is that there are a couple of them in here that are acting like they're pole beans, so I don't know if the packet got mislabeled or what, but that's kind of odd. But anyway, they got off to a tough start because, again, the quail were causing trouble. I had covered this bed right at planting time with some bird netting, and that helped a bit. But then, of course, I had to take it off. Now they're looking really good, so maybe the leaves aren't palatable to the quail anymore. But I just don't think they're going to make it by the end of the season. It was an experiment, and I figured it was worth a try. So this is the famous pole bean arbor. And it's not so famous this year because it has been so hot and dry. We've had horrible, just choking smoke from wildfire. I don't know if that has impacted them as well, but certainly the temperatures that went up to 114, that did not go well with them. So I have a lot of beans that are past their prime. I either didn't see them when they were growing, or I just kind of gave up, frankly. And I have a whole lot of beans, let me find a sample here, that are curly. And what happens is, if you see this on your bean plants, that means that there were conditions that interrupted their growth cycle. And so maybe one part was growing pretty well, another part was stunted, and it formed that curly bean. So if you see a lot of them on your plants, that's what it is. But anyway, you can see the leaves have been falling off. The plants are not happy. Amazingly enough, though, I have been picking every couple of days some normal looking beans. Not as many as we usually get, but even so, they did try to give me a harvest, and I'll give them credit for that. You'll also notice that our winter squash and pumpkin plants aren't looking so good, and it's all the after effects of that heat wave. So we've got leaves that are brown on the edges or brown overall, leaves that have fallen off, and so yeah, they're looking pretty pathetic. But the good news is they did produce a bunch of things for me to harvest, which is awesome. Now, in a recent video, I showed you how to know when to harvest winter squash and pumpkins. So if you missed that, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, you'll want to check it out. And so I won't go over that today, but I have been testing them to see if they're ready to harvest, and they're very close, but I'm giving them as much time as possible. But if we have a frost in the forecast, you better believe I'm going to get these harvested. Here's just a quick look at some of them. This is a cushaw. I'm supporting this squash because it's quite heavy with a netted bag, and that's just so it won't pull the vine down or break off the vine, which would be awful. It's very close to being ripe though, which is great. And then all of these little orange roundish ones are potimarron, which is a fabulous winter squash. They just get this size, and it's a very usable size. We really like them. Right behind the arbor that the winter squash and pumpkins are growing on, I've got a bunch of grape tomatoes. The variety is Pandorino, and a cherry tomato behind me that's called Sparky. And also you'll notice a lot of squash vines in here, and that's because they came through from the other side. And so I've got a pumpkin that's just about ripe. And then the funny thing is, in a video a while back, I was commenting on how I thought I had planted a bunch of autumn frost winter squash, and yet I wasn't seeing any anywhere. And so I thought, boy, I must have really messed up when I was planting seeds this spring. Well, it turns out they are in here, because here's one and here's another. I don't know if this one is going to make it because there's still some green on there, but that one is looking good. So I'm pretty tickled about that. The more the merrier in my book. This mess is our potato patch. We've got them growing both in a raised bed and in 5 different growing containers. They have been doing really well, but of course this time of year they look awful. We have snuck a few potatoes out from under the plants. They've been delicious, so I'm happy about that. And we are going to wait until the plants get completely frosted and turn brown before we harvest the main crop. So I'm looking forward to that. This rather empty looking bed used to have 3 Cocozelle zucchini plants in it, but I pulled them up a few days ago because they were done producing. But boy, did they produce for us. We got so many zucchini from them. They are very flavorful. I definitely recommend them. And lots of people benefited from the harvest from those plants. I also had 2 Goldilocks acorn squash in here that are a bush style, and they were finished producing as well. So I harvested the squash, which I'll show you in a moment, and then I just have left everything else in this bed for now. So those plants that are bending over are basil plants, Fino Verde. I have had trouble keeping up with them and nipping them back frequently, but they are fabulous and the taste is out of this world. And then those yellow plants are the big duck yellow marigolds. I grow them every year. I always have them out in my vegetable garden, and they are wonderful. Now before I show you those acorn squash, I had to show you this crazy tangle of plants here. These are volunteer squash. They have never gotten watered except the very few times that it rained. And essentially they look like gourds, so I'm going to use them for fall decorations. It illustrates the point that usually a lot of the squash plants that we grow are hybrids. And if you save the seeds from them, which I did not, they will likely not be the same as what the parent plant was. So what happened here is I think we had some seeds in our compost pile. They germinated, they decided to grow, and maybe last year's plants cross-pollinated. I don't know exactly what happened, but wait till I show you what we got out of these. And there's tons of them in here. I'm in our greenhouse now, and this is just a small portion of what's going to come out of that volunteer squash patch. And look at how cool they are. I mean, people pay big money for these, right? I've decided maybe I need to set up a little stand out at the road. But this is who knows what kind of squash, and it was either from cross-pollination, it was part of the heritage that's within a hybrid plant, who knows. But anyway, I have them in our greenhouse because I wanted to see if I could cure them a little bit for 2 weeks so that they will keep longer in storage. I'm a little concerned about these, but they feel pretty firm. So curing involves moving your winter squash and pumpkins to an area that is protected from the weather and gets good sunlight. And so this greenhouse is perfect for that. I just set them on sheets of newspaper, and that works really great. I do this for 2 weeks, and then I'll move them into our basement where it's darker and cooler. Now, let me show you those acorn squash I was telling you about. Here are the Goldilocks acorn squash that I harvested. They passed the thumbnail test, which I mentioned in that other video about harvesting squash and pumpkins. And they are doing just fine, so I decided to harvest them, and the plants didn't have anything else growing on them, so I was able to pull up those plants. And then this is just a pumpkin that also was ready to be cured. So all of these are going to be in here for 2 weeks, then they go to the basement. Okay, I just have 2 more things to show you and then we'll be finished. So what you're looking at is the first of 3 rows of tomatoes. And as you probably know, I have shot a series of 3 videos about what my pruning routine is so that the last of the green tomatoes will ripen. I have finished doing all of those steps as of last week, and now I'm just waiting for them to ripen, and I'm keeping an eye on the forecast because if a frost is going to come, I need to harvest everything. I have gotten way more tomatoes from our tomato patch than I expected. You can see that the plants look quite dead down low. That's partly from our heat wave and also because I recently turned off the water to the 2 beds that have the paste tomatoes growing in them. But we've gotten a very nice harvest. We just made another gallon of tomato sauce yesterday. So I'm happy with how they have done considering the conditions that they had to grow in this year. So that's very cool. Again, keeping an eye on the weather, that's the big thing right now. And anything that is full size and green or pale red is going to be picked and moved down into our basement to finish ripening. Now you're looking inside our little hoop house. And I had recently shown you this bed that was absolutely packed full of sweet potato vines. You'll notice this bed is empty. That's because we just harvested them yesterday. And we are pretty impressed with our first attempt at growing sweet potatoes in our chilly climate. We ended up with about 30 pounds of sweet potatoes from this bed, and then we grew some in a small bed that was not inside the hoop house, and we ended up with 26 pounds from there. So yes, it was a success. We're planning to grow them again next year, and of course to enjoy the harvest over the coming months. So, yay, sweet potatoes! Well, that concludes the September virtual vegetable garden tour. I hope you enjoyed it. Isn't it amazing the transformation a garden goes through throughout the season? Thanks so much for watching today, everybody. I'll see you next week.